They had all the leftover mustard gases, and they said, okay, we're not going to try to kill people right now. Let's try to kill the insects.
Time for Wine Talks with Paul K.
Fascinating story. This is Robert Mondavi from the Michael Mondavi Winery.
I taste a lot of wine.
Having a conversation with Shark Tank, Kevin O'Leary.
Michael Silacci, Opus One Winery.
Incredible conversation with Dr. Mia Ruth.
No matter what, you're definitely going to feel better.
Sit back and grab a glass. It's Wine Talks with Paul K.
Hey, welcome to Wine Talks with Paul K. And we are in studio today in beautiful Southern California, in Monrovia to be exact. A beautiful day. About to have a conversation with Katrina Frey.
You got it right, Paul.
Introductions in just a moment. Wine Talks, of course, available on iHeartRadio, Pandora, Spotify, wherever you hang out for podcasting. And sponsored by the Original Wine of the Month Club, now sporting the Napa and Sweet series of wines. But looks like I should be doing a Mendocino series of wines coming up here soon. But hey, have a listen. We've got some great shows in season 14, pushing the envelope a bit, trying to get off of the subject of swirling, sniffing in the soil and back into the philosophy and ideas behind what makes a glass of wine so great. Not to mention currently the Kladstrup interview, Wine and War, which is not even nearly scratching the surface of what we should talk about. But here we're having a conversation with Katrina Frey, and she is it says executive director here, but I mean, come on, that's not really it.
Well, my husband and I and one of his brothers founded the winery back in 1980. So I've worn all sorts of hats since then. Right.
And it's the first, you just mentioned, it's the first organic winery ever, I don't know if it wasn't certified back then.
Well, our vineyards were certified by California Certified Organic Farmers, CCOF. But back then we had the BATF, not the TTB.
Yeah, right.
And
that's right.
The BATF didn't have a federal definition of organic wine, so we just put on the label that the grapes were certified. It wasn't until 2002 when the USDA implemented the National Organic Standards, the NOSB.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that we got to start using the term organic wine.
I mean, here we are. You noticed right when you walked in my current book of agriculture by Rudolf Steiner.
I did.
I don't know if you call him the founder, the author, the promoter of biodynamic farming.
He was the founder of biodynamic farming. He was an Austrian scientist, very well known in his day, and a philosopher who lived in Germany. And, there's a link about Wine and War with Rudolf Steiner, too. He created the Center for Anthroposophy, which was spiritual science, I think is what he would call it, in Germany. And the fascists of the First World War burned it to the ground.
Wow.
And then he rebuilt it again, and it still exists in Dornoch.
Well, that's because I brought that up because you are also the first biodynamic, and I think we're going to peel that back quite granularity this year because biodynamic farming is an important thing, I think, all throughout the world. But you were the first biodynamic certified farm. Demeter, is that what did it?
Yeah.
When did Demeter start even?
Demeter is the oldest certification entity in the world. They started in 1928 in Germany.
So right around then.
Steiner gave his agricultural lectures in 1924. So 4 years later, Demeter was formed, and it still exists. It's the mothership there in Germany. But now there's Demeter USA, Demeter Brazil, Demeter France. So all of these countries have to adhere to a basic standard, the Demeter standard, but then they're allowed to exceed the standard as well. And what I like about it is Steiner never considered himself a guru. He gave these 4 lectures in agriculture to a group of farmers, and they came to him after World War I, and they were complaining about animal fertility, the facts that seeds weren't germinating as well, and also the fact that their harvests weren't lasting as long. And, after World War I, that's when we first saw war chemicals getting introduced into agriculture, another link of wine and war. So,
Big
you
one.
know, they had all the leftover mustard gases, and they said, okay, we're not going to try to kill people right now. Let's try to kill the insects instead. So, of course.
And there's still farms in Champagne that can't grow because of those sulfur gases that were put in the shells.
Isn't that sad?
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
So-
Long lasting.
So the biodynamic movement, I want to dig right into it. I mean, I always say basically people ask what it is, and in this layman's sense, it's basically organic on steroids, but it's probably much more than that.
Well, I
obviously.
like to say it's the gold standard of organics. And
That's a good way to put it. I like that.
yeah, so there is a standard that Demeter enforces. So we have Demeter USA, and wine has become sort of the flagship for Demeter USA, but we also in the United States have Demeter farms that grow wheat and are dairies and grow rice. So the most basic concept is that it's a whole organism, your farm, and you're trying to meet the fertility needs of the farm with the resources of the farm. So that quickly leads you to introducing farm animals, your cows, your sheep in the vineyards, your chickens. And then you gather their manures, you make your own compost. So at Frey Vineyards, for example, we have a herd of cows, we have sheep, we have goats, and then we have all the leftover seeds and skins from the winemaking process. And we have oak leaves, so we make these giant compost piles and make beautiful compost. We do import a few materials. We import lime because soils in Northern California are traditionally deficient of lime. But we get it, from the ocean, from seashells. So you're looking at the farm, you're trying not to buy bat guano from Chile. And you're trying to close that loop, which is so important nowadays, with carbon footprint.
Piero Incenza, not to interrupt you, Piero
No, go
Incenza of Chateau Bacco, not Chateau Bacco, but Bark. I can't remember the name of the winery. Anyway, he's growing Pinot Noir in Patagonia, and when you said that the cows, the sheep are there, but he goes, the armadillos are back. And I thought to myself, this vision of these armadillos walking on the vineyard,
tramping through.
Yeah, like this is. This means something that we're now back to like the original source of nutrients for the soil because the armadillos are around. I thought, wow, that's interesting. You don't hear that every day, right?
You do not hear that every day.
There's something very fascinating about.
Are we supposed to tear down our fences to let the deer back in?
Who knows? Well, there's the guys elude me the name. He wrote a book. He had gone to a country associated with India with its own king and queen. He's a master of wine candidate. He was on the show last year. Cool. And he wrote an interesting book. And he wrote back to the king and queen. He wasn't there for wine, though he's studying it. And he wrote back, you need to try and grow wine grapes here.
Oh.
So, and his reason for the story, because it's kind of fascinating. And so they said, only if you do it. Apparently they were impressed with his credentials. And so they planted 4 or 5 varieties in 4 or 5 different elevations. Their problem is monkeys.
Oh my gosh!
You can't play with the monkeys. You can't touch them. You can't wall them out. Obviously, they just climb over where they want. And so now
they're climbing all over the vines. Oh my goodness!
So organic farming, I put a lot of thought into this as I'm reading, and I think it's almost like what's old is new again. For how many centuries organic farming was always organic. We didn't have pesticides, insecticides, and herbicides at that point. So what is it so special that we're going back to it? Why did we get away from it in the first place? And then why is it so fascinating, unique that we're getting back to it when it always was?
Right. There's this wonderful book called Farmers of 40 Centuries that leads you back through the past of organic farming. So obviously the world's population grew to the point that it almost is today with organic farming. And it's really a myth that you can't feed people using organic farming. I think
that's interesting thought. That was a question I had.
Yeah. There's lots of studies now. There's a wonderful institute called the Rodale Institute. Robert Rodale's parents were the founder of Organic Gardening magazine. And they've done side-by-side trials for years with organic beds and conventional beds, and they've proven that the soil fertility of organics can produce more corn and wheat. But I mean, the reason that I got drawn to organic farming was this realization that we live in a toxic sludge, and my friends are dying of cancer. I grew up in Michigan, and you look at the whole agricultural zones around the Great Lakes, the cancer rates are off the charts. Yeah, it's really sad, and it just seems so counterintuitive that you would put poison on the things that you're about to eat. So there's that. There's also the whole thing about resources and what you're going to spend your money on. Do you want to be in the pocket of giant companies like Monsanto, or do you want to try to save your own seeds? That doesn't apply to grapes, but save your own seeds and be more self-sufficient.
There's a cluster of cancer in Montebello here in Southern California, which is amongst the people that live there, that grew up there, is pretty much as a result of the dump that's there.
Oh.
And prior to all the protections that they're supposedly put into place now, but back then it seeped into the water. Who knows where it went? There's
Probably
a huge
into the
cluster
water, huh?
of people I know, family members I know that have died from cancer.
Nuclear power plants too. I think those have pretty bad clusters around them.
The idea of organic farming, if you read The Third Plate from Dan Barber, where they talk about what's going on in the soil, cross-planting for nutrients, the ability to look at a vineyard, look at a farm and say, well, because those weeds are growing there, we're probably short on manganese or nitrogen or whatever we need. But in that book, one of the people said, "Look, we can't feed the world organically." You don't believe that?
No, I don't. In fact,
you can get yields.
You can definitely get wonderful yields, and the other really important thing as we face climate change is that organic soils with their tilth, which is the organic matter in soil. It's when you pick up a handful of soil and you can sort of make it into a snowball as opposed to just dust going through your fingers. So it's better soil to get you through a drought and to get you through torrential rains, because it can store soil, let it store water, let it percolate down, not just run off. So going forward into climate change, organic soils are going to become more and more crucial.
Because I mentioned Louis Jadot was just here, and Burgundy is probably one of the regions most affected by climate change right now, and Pinot Noir being very sensitive to that. As
their hail and
there's all kinds of problems there. It's like the monks in the 12th century. They were farming organically. They just did what they had to do, right?
Right.
And we don't know what the yields were. At least I don't not studied that yet. But
I mean, the other thing about organic farming today is, yes, it's looking back, but we also have wonderful technology now. We have robotic tractors that can sense where the weeds are. So you can actually go through a field and they'll leave.
I don't think Rudolf Steiner knew about this, did he?
Rudolf Steiner didn't know about that. But I think he probably would approve, because it's the alternative to using Roundup, where you just go in and spray poison. You can do mechanical farming to take care of your weeds. A whole lot of the assault on our lands right now, particularly in vineyards, are the herbicides, and Roundup is the classic one that you spread between your rows every single year. And that goes right down into our water, and it actually becomes systemic in grapes, vines, so that in France now the pesticide level in a bottle of typical French wine can be measured to pretty scary degrees. And a lot of that is herbicides. So if you have mechanical means to control the weeds, you can get rid of the herbicides.
Do we have the boyfriend on Petticoat Junction to blame for all this? When he would fly his plane over.
Yeah.
So, do you think 3 years is enough for a vineyard to cleanse itself? Wasn't it 7 years in the Bible between harvests?
Right, the fallow lands. It's enough for a lot of chemicals used, but to be perfectly honest, it's not enough for glyphosates, which is the active ingredient in Roundup. So, but I don't know. It's a trade-off. I mean, our vineyard is one of the oldest organic soils in California that's been perpetually organic.
That's pretty
cool. But at the same time, I want to encourage people to convert. I mean, how else are we going to do it? And sadly, we have glyphosate now in rainwater. We have glyphosate pretty much everywhere. So it's a start. So I would say for about, 75% of the chemicals used, 3 years is going to be gone. But sometimes I don't know how to honestly answer your question.
Well,
Paul.
No, I just wonder because that's what it takes. And then I had the mayor of Montefalco here.
Oh,
Monsieur, he's our Italian guy.
Signor
Valentino Valentini.
Ooh, great name.
Right?
Yeah.
Could have been in the movies.
Right.
And his comment to me was, my kids are playing in that vineyard, so why would I want to, they come home.
Really
and
good point,
Then the idea that, let's say the dog goes out, the armadillos are out there. Let's say the dog goes out there, and it's romping around in all this pesticides. It comes in, and the baby, and I have a 9-month-old, Connor's daughter, starts playing with the dog.
Hey, people are putting that stuff on their lawns too. So that's a huge assault right now is home care and lawns, because that's not even regulated. At least in agriculture, you have to make reports as to how much you're putting on. But people spray all sorts of poisons all around their house, and their dogs and their kids go out and roll around in it.
Seems like if I'm a winemaker, that's what I'd want to do anyway. In the certification part, this is sort of getting the political part of this. The certification part seems to be just sex for the box office because we just want to put on a sticker on it. I've had customers tell me in our organic club, I know the wines are organic. Winemakers fill out the form with what they, the processes, but they're not necessarily certified. And, the woman calls and says, well, it's not just the thing's not on there. I said, well, I'm sorry, but it's organically farmed and produced. Do you think that? I mean, you are certified, obviously, but you did it. I
am, and I like to. I just think it helps people to really maintain honesty, and not get tempted by that 10th year of I've got some white fly, so I'm just going to put a little bit on. And if you did that in an organic vineyard, you'd lose your certification for 3 years. So. But, really what I think conventional agriculture should be the people paying the fees and the monies to society. And I think you should be, a lot of times it's the fees of organic certification that are holding people back from doing it. Well,
it was farming organically, let's say your stage now after all these years.
Yeah, there's some expense during that first 3 years of converting, but then you also have to pay the agency that comes out and certifies you every year. And for some people, let's just say that's part of the... I know, but wouldn't it be nice if the conventional growers had to pay that instead?
That's a political movement. You can think, I can't raise that flag for you, but... So to explain for the listeners then, now we're going to take organic, we'll call it the gold standard, which is now biodynamic. Which, offhanded, it includes, the cycles of the moon, when to plant, when to pick. But what else does it do?
Yes. Well, there's the preparations, which are sort of like homeopathic medicines. So, and this is the somewhat woo-woo part of it, is that you use...
I'll look that up in the book, woo-woo.
Yeah. Is that you use... different herbal mixtures, and you bury them in the soil, and then you add them to water and stir them for an hour to activate them. So it's very micro amounts of nutrients that stimulate root growth and also give the plants a little more protection against too much sun.
It's validated that this stimulates root growth. Because if I'm a
Right.
grape farmer, I really want those roots to get down there and figure out what they're.
Right. And
they're
if you go onto the website of Demeter USA, there are some studies that show it. The farmer is asked to be an observer, to go out and walk through their land every year and every day rather, and everyone who really is a hardcore farmer is going to want to do that and understand that. The U.S. invented another part, or introduced another part of the standard, to set aside 10% of your land to biodiversity. So in Napa Valley, you're seeing people converting to biodynamic and actually ripping out some of their very valuable vineyard land and planting strips of insectary plants that attract beneficial insects and bring some biodiversity in. So it depends on the part of the country where you are as to how you achieve that 10%. At Frey Vineyards, we have a lot of riparian zones with little creeks running through. So we're protecting those riparian zones and not planting right up to the edge of them. And then we have wildlife corridors for birds and
How much of this?
And plants.
How much of this is just history, years, hundreds of years in Europe,
Right.
maybe
Well,
even here in America, of just understanding the environment and making it more beneficial, and how much of it is sort of modern technologies figuring out these things?
it's definitely a combination. I mean, for centuries, we had family farms in both Europe and, of course, in Asia too, but I'm not as eloquent about farming methods then. And in the United States, where you didn't just do a monocrop, you had your cows, you had your woodlot, you had your vegetable crops, you had your orchard. So you had this mixed operation. And now what we have, are these vast fields of one crop throughout most of the Midwest of the United States. And the potential for disease is huge because, as we found out during COVID, some people have natural immunities. Not everybody gets it, or
Yeah, right.
everybody gets it in different ways. So just this whole concept of like raising one kind of turkey for all of the United States, it opens itself up to a lot of
That's
potential
interesting.
problems. And then rather than using compost every year as a nitrogen source, you're just putting on liquid nitrogen, so you're destroying your soil tilth.
My dad was he was born in Cairo, but he part of his family farmed, I don't know what, fava beans maybe, I don't know. But
What are the famous crops? Cotton,
Yeah.
fava beans.
and so when he came to America, he was a pharmacist, he did the scientific method, the whole thing, but eventually he wanted to be a farmer again, so he bought this 12-acre avocado ranch in Julian and farmed it for years. And my mom, being an avid grower of things, and my wife and I are terrible at it, but she brought in citrus, then they brought in bees, they brought in cross plants to and they made incredible avocados, and it was all natural. And my dad went to all the seminars. He was kind of a rookie at all this, but was able to not triple, but 30% more production.
There you have it.
Yeah, completely. I just thought this conversation stimulated this thought I had never thought about before he actually raised the production of the farm after he did all these things, and he's being part of it.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting.
What happened to that property?
Well, they got older, and I just lost him in June. There he is, there in that painting right there. But no, great guy, and
He looks wonderful.
he just one thing I learned from it is off topic is that you are as a human who you are. You're not what you do, and it's hard for me here because doing this wine thing for so long. And he walked away from his pharmacy trade. He walked away from his farm. He walked away from his wine trade as a person, with pride of what he did, but it wasn't who he was, which is kind of interesting thought.
That's great.
I had on the show a gentleman named Zach. He owned a product called Zach Z-Biotics. It's an anti-hangover elixir that's genetically modified before you start drinking, and it's a probiotic that's been genetically modified. We had this great conversation about GMO. I'm sure this plays into the biodynamic farming, et cetera. But then on the other side, I read a book called Cuisine in America, How It Got That Way by Dr. Friedman out of Yale, who's, by the way, a medieval servitude specialist. So I don't know why he figured that one out.
Yeah.
We had dinner once, a fascinating conversation. He's talking about how there were 12,000 varietals of apples, in the early days of America. And now there's just, the 6 that you see at the market.
Right.
So how does GMO sit with this? And now it's interesting. Here's what the thought came from.
Okay.
This guy says, look, there have been natural hybrids, and there's like 40,000 strains of wheat in America, that there have been natural hybrids that have been toxic to people because we don't know. We cross these things naturally, and all the pieces of this chromosomal change, DNA change, could result in something bad. When as GMO, they target one little piece of it, and they say, okay, we're going to increase the fleshiness of an apple. But tell me about GMO.
Well, I'd say that's a very disingenuous argument because the natural crosses, if they don't work, they're not going to be perpetuated in nature. Whereas GMOs, in spite of what your guest might have said, they are very random.
Random in that how they're tested,
in what
or?
they in what they express after they're created. I mean, these are genes that don't want to go together, so they're essentially shot into. You shoot one, together. And
sounds like some marriages I've seen. I'm kidding.
Yeah. You put the mouse and the strawberry in the same room, and in spite of all the romantic music you play, it's just not going to happen, Yeah. So
GMO, you're saying, basically is forcing the DNA change.
Yeah, it's forcing the DNA change, and the replication is you don't know what's really going to happen.
So the next day, I had on the show a GMO distilled spirits. Non-GMO distilled spirits maker.
Okay. Yeah. So they're using wheat and corn that are conventional and haven't been genetically modified.
Right.
So that's great.
But how does that play out when you're distilling something? I mean, doesn't that kind of ruin everything?
Well, I mean, the GMOs can enter into the soil. I'm not sure how it plays out when you're actually ingesting it. I don't know. But in nature, they're spread.
So I tell people.
It's interesting in the world of wine because they have resisted GMOs. Grape breeders have. There have been a few experiments.
Yeah, I've never heard of one.
At the University of Florida against Pierce's disease. But because of our rich tradition, I mean, people would sort of be up in the arms about a genetically modified Pinot Noir.
Why you would do it, though, what you were trying to get to.
Right. Well, you could make them more hearty or, more flavorful. Supposedly those are. But, honestly, the reason that GMOs were created was for Monsanto to sell more herbicide alongside them. They don't have a whole lot of potential to actually help mankind. I'll put it that way.
Some people always ask about it, and I say, well, don't you wonder why the tomatoes in the bottom of the truck coming down the 5 freeway aren't squished?
Yeah, that's a really good point.
There should be tomato sauce by the time that happens, right?
Right on.
So, there's a winery in Sardinia. They grow Sangiovese, and they play music. And, I don't think that's part of the biodynamic, the Rudy's. I haven't got to that chapter yet. If it is,
Steiner didn't go there, but why not?
They apparently Bose, the famous audio company, put vines in a room, and some were playing concert music. Mozart and Beethoven, and other were playing classical music, and other playing rock and roll, and the vines grew away from the rock and roll and towards the speakers for classical music. So this guy puts in this giant audio system in the vineyard.
I love it.
So the whole town's rocking, everybody dancing in the streets. But it's not part of what would traditionally be biodynamic.
No, it's not. But I have read about experiments in greenhouses where the plants are happier. I do think that there's an undefined and probably unmeasurable relationship between the human being and the plants that they're growing, though.
I think so. I think that's what a glass of wine is all about.
That's what a glass of wine is all about. And if music is part of that human being's love affair with the world, why not, right?
It could be.
Yeah.
Piero Vincenzo also said, and it was the most compelling argument that I've ever heard for at least part of the biodynamic movement. That is, look, if the moon's gravitational pull can move water as it does, and your body's 90% water, imagine what it's doing under the soil and in your body. And I thought, that's an interesting concept. And I said that to a winemaker out of the south of France, I think the rosé maker, and he goes, yeah, when I used to walk to the beach in Nice, the water was very close. Very far away. Now it's very close. And I said, that's interesting, because in Hermosa Beach, the water's much further away than it was even in the 20s.
Huh.
And you can look at the pictures, and you can see that there's been some
things are
changing in that. I thought it was fascinating to witness that. And then, wow, you apply that to the idea that nutrients in the soil, as vines whether it's vines or crops, seeking water, that this is changing things.
Right. Yeah, I mean, if you're growing something other than grapes, there are certain days to plant your cover crop, and farmers for a long time have realized that it's great to plant seeds right before the full moon, because germination is easier than as you move into that full moon and past. I mean, for grapes, it's obviously a perennial crop, so you don't replant every year. But then there are biodynamic winemakers who try to harvest on certain days of the biodynamic calendar. I mean, for us, harvest is such an intense time, and it's so weather driven that
it's kind of hard to plan around.
It's hard to plan. Yeah. We go back to measuring our sugar and acids and looking at the weather report and deciding when we're going to harvest.
That's the phenolic ripeness, all the phenolic ripeness, and all that has to play into it.
Yeah.
It's interesting. There were a few subjects I want to talk about. One of them just hit me that Louis Jadot, I brought it up earlier, Freddie Barney, they planted, and I saw the graph yesterday, I think a couple hectares of vines, same clone of Pinot Noir, 9 different rootstocks.
Oh, fun.
And, climate, like we said about climate change, and who knows what they're studying. We didn't get into all those details, but, he's not going to know for 10 years probably,
That's
right?
True.
And how you and you have to manage all the other variables to make sure that there's not too many swaying. And I thought to myself, wow, that is a commitment to the future generations in this industry.
I was going to say, I hope he has some
nephews
and nieces coming up in the ranks.
But don't isn't with wine, we only get one chance a year. You've got how many harvests under your belt right now? But
44.
So that's a pretty good, that's a lot for most winemakers, right?
Yeah.
They don't usually get 44. But that doesn't seem, in the grand scheme of things, doesn't seem like a whole lot of chances.
It's a blink of time.
Yeah, a whole lot of chances to figure this out. And you're tasting your wines. They're solid wines.
Thank you.
And balanced. And I taste, the point of this rambling here is I taste a lot of biodynamic wines and a lot of that taste like kombucha. And I've always thought there's no reason, there's no excuse for a wine to taste that raw and rough, just because they're organic.
So because we make our wines with no added sulfites, that was a big challenge. And the first decade of our winery, my husband and his brother Paul Frey, who's now our winemaker, really spent that decade studying wine chemistry, and they traveled to Europe, and they figured it out. But what we needed to really make it all work was good modern equipment as well. And So the wines are not part of the natural wine movement. They're filtered before bottling. We have a very sophisticated bottling line. It's a zero oxygen bottling line, similar to what they use in beer making.
Yeah.
That draws a vacuum so that the wines are protected during the bottling process, which is when they could be most at risk of oxidation. And we've also discovered that wines need a certain amount of oxygen for proper maturity. So we use micro-ox, and we expose the wines to oxygen right when they're first going through the fermentation process. So it's really a combination of
I don't get that
great
rich.
science.
Sometimes that produces that big, beefy, fruity, like Kama style wine when you do that, but I don't sense that. I get great balance.
Yeah, well, we're
You brought up the
good
natural.
at what we're
You brought up the natural. You have 44 chances at it, right?
Right.
You brought up the natural movement, and I say this all the time, but people are like, well, this is natural. Like, look, don't even go there, because as there was no definition for certification for organic wine back in your day.
Yeah, there's
no definition for natural wine.
I agree.
And it's just like, whatever you want to call it.
It's
right?
very random, and I'm sure there are some excellent bottles here and there, but there's a lot of
I don't know what it means.
not so great ones.
Like again, I go back to the monks in Burgundy. Their wines were natural and organic. I mean, it's just the way they were.
Yeah.
And possibly they were biodynamic, or at least there was a celestial involvement in the wines.
Right.
But let's talk about sulfur for a second. This
Sure.
is a fascinating part of this book I'm reading that you're going to get for your husband.
Yes.
There's a
Wine
story
and War.
that they couldn't get enough sulfur phosphate through
Mining.
and the Germans were taking it and whatever. So then there's this vendor, and I think it was Bordeaux. He's stealing copper from the Germans, giving it to a Bordelais guy who has this little hut in the middle of a vineyard somewhere that the German soldiers seem to leave alone, and he's producing copper sulfate from this stuff. And then the guy got busted, this guy. This is how fascinating this story is. The guy stealing the copper got in trouble, and they never heard from him again. They went to a concentration camp. But the Bordelais sort of invented this idea, right, in the first place, copper sulfate. Why is it, if it's a natural element, why is this a problem?
Well, the sulfites that a winemaker uses are metabisulfites. They don't have the copper in them, and they are a synthetic material.
They're synthetic.
Yes,
Okay.
they are. Yes.
There's no natural versions of it?
Well, if you went into Mount Vesuvius and
Which is a little risky.
right. Yeah, so
Says no one ever, right?
That's
Okay, so-
the natural version
Yeah.
of it. Sulfur wicks. So there's elemental sulfur that organic and biodynamic winemakers are allowed to use in their vineyards, but that's mined. There's also a vineyard sulfur that's a byproduct of the petroleum industry. So the metabisulfites, the synthetics that are so commonly used throughout the wine industry, are a really helpful tool for a winemaker.
And what do they do?
They prevent oxidation, just like, when you cut an apple and it starts turning brown, you sprinkle a little metabisulfite
I
on
have to
it
get
and
some,
it
yeah.
goes away. And, you probably remember the scandal of the salad bars
Yes,
that
right, yeah.
people were
Sizzler.
occasionally dropping dead from too much sulfites sprinkled on the lettuce to
Right.
keep it crisp or to keep it green
Right.
rather than brown. So yes, they're mainly used for that because they make a winemaker's job easy.
So it's preservation of the wine?
It's preservation.
Once
and
it's in the bottle
oxidation.
with the sulfites, because okay, let's say we're protecting the wine during production,
Yeah.
so it doesn't oxidize. But once it's in the bottle, is there a value to it?
It can possibly prolong life,
Aging.
definitely with aging. I mean, we have a wine library, and we're drinking 20-year-old bottles of Cabernet that are beautiful.
Well,
But across the board, we say that that people should age our red wines for 8 years or so, and our white wines should be drunk within 2 years of bottling. It's not as different as standard wines. I mean, a heck of a lot of whether a wine ages or not is how it's stored, which you probably are well aware of.
And some of the wines that we have to buy on the shelf, we wish weren't there in the first place, and certainly we don't want to try and age them.
Yeah, yeah, and we do on-demand bottling at our winery because of the nature of our wines. So
how many bottles are we bottling these days?
we're not a tiny winery. We made 220,000 cases last year.
That's substantial.
Yeah, we sell our wine across the United States.
That's substantial, particularly kind of throws in the face of this idea that you can't feed the world organically because you make a lot of wine organically. That's a tremendous amount, particularly under those conditions. And do we talk about the fact they're organic all the time, or are we selling these wines in the marketplace? And I think you're here in Southern California with Serendipity. Certainly, Graham's one of the great reps around here. He brings the wines all the time to tasting. Is that the selling point, or is just the wine? I
like to get back to the wine, and we have a pretty impressive list of awards that the wines are winning, judged right along with conventional wines. The biodynamic Petite Syrah sitting on the table there just got 92 points with the Wine Enthusiast. So,
should I judge them differently?
I don't think so. I'd like you to think about them.
Just taste
as
them.
Just
read the
taste
label
them
later.
And read the label. But at the same time, there's a pretty high percentage of people that are sensitive to sulfites. I mean, I'm not a doctor, but it looks to me like as we age, we get a little more sensitive to sulfites. I mean, sulfites are not a carcinogenic, but they can give you a wicked headache if you're somebody who's sensitive to them.
There's those arguments and articles that there's no such thing. There's never been a registered sulfite allergy in wine. Blah blah blah. Blah.
Oh, I don't buy that. But for the health, I mean, getting back to your grandchildren and playing with the family dog who's been out rolling around.
Mm-hmm.
We have farm workers. We live on our land. We have a beautiful number
a
of
permanent staff of workers that pick the grapes.
Yeah. Well, we use mechanical harvesting as well as I mean,
or do you use transient labor for that? Some of that.
We use our permanent staff. Sadly, it's really hard to get transient labor because of our somewhat draconian policies at the border these days.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to get too political here,
show.
But you can't get gringos to work in the vineyard.
I'm not picking on grapes.
Yeah.
Well, maybe it's a little weekend jaunt,
Exactly.
Going to the Paso Robles and have some fun,
Right.
This is so much fun. Like, no, I don't want to do that.
Right. No, we're really dependent on immigrant labor for a lot of our agricultural work in this country.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
I just wondered because that's a lot of wine and
yeah. So we do have we hire labor crews that come in and help us pick because for mechanical harvesting, your vineyard has to be planted with that in mind. So some of our older vines are head pruned, those beautiful octopus shapes, and then we need to pick those by hand.
Do you sell grapes?
No, we buy grapes. So about a third of our grapes we grow ourselves, and then we buy the other 2/3 from certified organic growers from Mendocino County and Lake County, a little bit from Napa, a little bit from Sonoma. We've bought some grapes from Lodi over the years. And, with climate change, we're sort of spreading our net a little bit wider because fire is the big fear in our area.
It's real. Again, it's not political. We're talking about how it came about, but it's real. In fact, yesterday during this tasting, and they showed fields it was a very interesting comment today. He showed fields in Burgundy where they're burning whatever they can burn to keep the frost from, destroying the bud break. And then he says, but I could be creating some of this climate change by burning all this stuff I'm burning. And
isn't that ironic? I know.
That's very interesting.
Well, up where we live, it's cold during bud break, but we rely on water and for frost protections. So we have the rain birds.
Oh, yeah, right.
Well, fans don't stop working after about 28 degrees.
Oh,
and
really?
It's not unusual for us to dip down a little bit lower than that. So we need the water to run the fans, and that can be a problem with drought. I mean, this year I think we're going to be okay. Thank goodness the reservoirs are overflowing. But
actually, there's a reservoir here in Sierra Madre that I've never seen water in ever, and it looks like it's about 6 feet. It's pretty interesting. I've never seen any water.
You mean 6 feet
of water?
Oh, that's wonderful.
It's a ton. I've never. We drove by it yesterday. My wife and I were like, I've never seen water. We've been here since 1988.
Wow.
Yeah, so
it's exciting. And then think what's going to happen when all the snow melts.
And all the
too.
snow melts,
yeah.
Right. Well, my daughter just moved to Potsdam, New York, and she sent us pictures. I'm like, oh my God, what are you doing? This is like one of the coldest cities in America.
What brought her there?
Actually, her husband's an Anglican priest, and he got a church there, and that's what moved him there. And I'm like, more power to you. I'm all about spreading your wings and doing those experiences.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
She wanted to go to Notre Dame, which we took there on February 1st, like the coldest day of the year. It didn't bother her. So
just going back to
she didn't get in
the climate she loves.
Yeah, exactly. I never thought that of a SoCal girl,
Good for her.
This is very fascinating. We're already on our 45 minutes, and I don't want to take much more of your time.
I love your questions, Paul. It's been a wonderful discussion.
Thank you. Well, it's the stuff that I hear that I want to understand. I want to understand it better, because when I taste wines like this, like I said, the one thing that completely is different, particularly ones I said like that taste like kombucha. Actually, there's one more thought before we get off.
Okay.
The idea that you are what you eat eats, really. I mean, people say you are what you eat, but yes, what you're eating is probably just as important as that. And so this is sort of just like I'm going to push the button a little bit. So if I'm tilling my soil in the vineyard with horse manure and armadillo manure, am I potentially picking that up in a wine, or at least the nuances of this, or the vine so deep we're not influencing it?
I don't think so. It goes into feeding the soil, and then the grapes, the roots take in nutrients, but not actually
like
raw materials.
If I say wine tastes like shit, that doesn't mean that.
No.
I'm joking.
Let's not go there. No, I mean, manure's been essential for agriculture for all
that was a good point right there.
Of history.
Yeah. Do you use the cow horn? What are they doing?
We do. That's part of the preparations.
And
we make our own preparations. Well, that's like I say, that's the woo-woo part of it. That's a little bit hard to quantify. But it does, in our belief, we believe that it stimulates micronutrients within the soil after it's sprayed on.
So it's not used to protect against pests necessarily, or it has something that
No, it's more soil fertility.
I mean, I can see it.
Yeah.
I can totally see it.
There's also a preparation that's ground silica, which is quartz, and you can spray that on your ripening fruit early in the morning, and it increases photosynthesis in the vines to speed up ripening. And we usually don't have much problem with ripening because we're in a valley where we get really hot days, but then cool nights.
We have a granddaughter who's got cancer. She's doing well. Our good friend was back in chemo for breast cancer, and my wife's reaction is bone broth. And just boiling the crap out of chicken feet and chicken backs.
It's really, really nutritious.
That stuff is very powerful.
Yeah, good for her.
That's what we're talking about here in the vineyard. Well, thank you for answering that. I just wanted to ask that question. So here's a book. You said you weren't a doctor, but this is a book called "Wine is the Best Medicine." It's a French doctor from the 70s. He was a real MD. He was also a homeopathic doctor.
Oh, interesting. I'll have to read that one as well.
Yeah, this is a fun book. You find it on eBay.
Okay.
And so I'm going to give you a question. Obviously, he's a French doctor, so all the maladies, there's all these human maladies, but the cures and or symptom relief comes from French wines.
Okay.
So I'm going to give you a malady. Now, you don't have to worry about getting it right or wrong. It's more like, why are you going to answer the question? Answer it. So we're going to go with bronchitis.
Ooh. So that's a lung thing.
And you can have yourself a Saint-Emilion, you can have yourself some dry champagne, or you can have a Burgundy Rouge
Oh my gosh!
to help
I'm
with
gonna,
this. What do
I'm
you
gonna
think?
fail
you're
this test.
No,
Why
there's
don't
no
you
failure.
why don't you educate me, Paul?
There's more. There's no failure because no one gets it right, and the
Okay,
guys.
well,
33% of people
okay,
get it
well,
right.
what about oxygen if it's bronchitis? So you got your little bubbles, so champagne.
Well, that's right. Write down the Master of Wine test. You got to justify your answers, but it was wrong. So
I'm not surprised.
it talks about actually this one's kind of weird. The back thing says something different than the front, but it says Burgundy or Bordeaux.
Okay.
Both of these wines are rich in phosphorus, and the properties of which are listed at the beginning of this work. Dosage. Now, the dosage is more important. This is the interesting part. There's a dosage, and there's a little preparation about it. So you will guess that. So the dosage is 4 glasses a day,
Whoa.
but heat the chosen wine in a double boiler to 140. I don't know what that does, because the alcohol sort of dissipates at that point,
The
right?
alcohol would go away.
But
it would change.
now you know
the
when you have bronchitis.
flavor. Okay.
Warm up some Burgundy.
Well, it's like a hot toddy, sort of.
Maybe, yeah. Actually, it does
Yeah.
say add some cinnamon and sugar. I never read this one before. You're the first one to get this question.
Okay.
So, kidney malfunction, particularly. Yeah. Okay. Well, it's a
I
fun
love
book.
it. Okay. Well, I need to get that book.
It's a fun book, and
You
it's got all
can.
kinds
You
of
can. Why don't you just read one more? Don't quiz me to reveal my utter ignorance about this
okay.
topic, but I'm curious
Let's
about
try
one more cure.
pregnancy.
Oh.
During pregnancy, unless there are serious organic lesions or other disorders capable of modifying normal gestation, the pregnant woman may drink wine. Now, that's an interesting problem because a lot of doctors will tell you, don't drink wine now. My wife's doctor said it's okay to have a glass.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know why you would do it anyway. 2 factors are to be considered. First, the mother's need for mineral salts and vitamins to prevent weakening of the skeleton and degeneration of the tissues.
Okay.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Second, the necessity to stimulate the antitoxin function of the liver, whose role is to destroy maternal and fetal toxins. And that is a light red Bordeaux. Rich in calcium and enotannins.
Well, I hope he's not recommending 4 glasses like the previous.
2 glasses
entry.
per meal.
Ooh. That'll be a little controversial in these days.
Yeah, it might be these
won't it?
days, right?
Yeah. But I understand the mineral.
I wonder if
Yeah.
look at this is France, right? I have
right.
a poster.
I mean, probably French women keep drinking wine when they're pregnant.
I have a poster from
Let's see.
1932. It was hung apparently as a public service around Béziers, which is in the south. And if I can find it, I'll get you a copy of it. I've been trying to find an original. It's just a small poster, and it was posted everywhere. And it basically said in French that wine is not responsible for alcoholism. It's okay to drink wine. It's okay for children to drink wine as long as you put some water in it.
Right.
And 4 years old, they were saying in this
Yeah.
poster. Okay, if that's what you grew up in, how is it that it would be a problem if you're pregnant?
And in the colonial periods of the United States, Johnny Appleseed, the planting the apples, that was all about making cider.
That's right.
And the alcohol consumption was huge in the United States. And people kept having babies.
Yeah, they're still okay. Everybody's okay.
Yeah.
Tell me, is it Frey vineyards.com? Is that what?
Fryvineyards.com.
Right. So I got it wrong.
It's actually frywine.com.
Frywine.com.
Yeah.
And but available throughout the country.
And we have a wine club.
When you have a wine club, you're welcome to talk about that.
Well, thanks to you starting the whole concept
that's right.
of wine clubs. Yeah. Yeah, we have a wine club, and it's only going to get more fun now that I didn't even mention that we had a devastating fire in 2017. So we've built a whole new state-of-the-art winery, and it's going to be a great place to learn and
we
find out about
where are the guest
biodynamics.
quarters? You have guest quarters up there?
Not quite yet, but we will soon. We will soon.
And how many varietals
still
are you making
coming
for
up
the
from
club members to get a chance to
Oh,
try it?
we've got 16 different varietals.
Yeah.
So it's a fun selection. We have our new moon wine, which is 4 wines 3 times a year, or we have our full moon, which is 6 wines 3 times a year.
Great. Okay. Those are the
And
club options.
Those are the club options. Yeah.
Well, congratulations on all that. I mean, this is probably passé to say congratulations after 44 years, but it's
thank you,
fascinating to
Paul.
talk to the first organic and biodynamic farms in America, and I think it's an important movement for general health of what we're doing. And then, I always say it's people like, this is what drives me nuts. We're not done yet, even though it's 54. We got to get to this.
Okay.
It drives me nuts to see organizations, corporate America, talking about a healthy glass of wine compared to an unhealthy one. So the other day I'm in Whole Foods and there's Kendall Jackson's Chardonnay, low alcohol, low carb, whatever they want to call it. And I looked at it, it's like 11%. And I was showing my wife, I said, look, if that 750 ml is 14% alcohol, then you're really talking about like a half inch, the whole volume of the bottle. There's like maybe an inch and a half. And if you take 2% away from that, big deal.
Yeah.
What's that doing to anybody? And so what if it's 120 calories for the glass or 85? You're only talking about 35 calories difference for what?
You're on a topic that I think we have very similar feelings about. I think it's a fad. I think it's a bit of a scam, really.
It's a total scam.
Alcohol is alcohol, and
it's not a health beverage. Let's just face it. It's
right.
There's certain health benefits to it, but you don't drink it because you're trying to be healthy, right? It's not Gatorade. Even Gatorade's unhealthy, but let's say organic Gatorade.
No, I hope that this one will fade away. I'll put it that way.
It's floor stacks at Whole Foods. Floor stacks. All right. We're done. Thank you for the time. It was a pleasure speaking with you. I hope we can do it again.
Thank you.
We can do it again.
I hope that you can come up sometime and visit us. Do you ever get up to Mendocino? You'd really enjoy hanging out with my husband, and he could talk a lot of Steiner with you once you get through that book.
Yeah, you can see the binding is not broken very much.
Good luck with that.
Cheers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. It's been delightful.